Ideal mesmo para o mundo atual seria fazer o ensino médio junto com o curso técnico, certo? É no Senac que o aluno tem autonomia de verdade, formação cidadã, foco na diversidade, preparação para o Enem, material didático sem taxas e muito mais. Na real, tem tudo que você precisa para se sentir preparado para a vida. Seja para entrar no mundo do trabalho ou te ajudar a decidir o que fazer na faculdade. Quer saber? Senac. Vem comigo! Acesse sp.senac.br/ensino-médio-técnico.
I am Madison Timmons.
I'm Chris Susi.
And we're paranormal specialists who live in the most haunted city on earth, Savannah, Georgia. Every day is Halloween in our line of work, so join us as we spin true tales of haunts, murders, and disturbing Savannah history. I'm Madison.
I'm Chris.
And welcome to the most haunted city on earth. Hello, and welcome back, y'all, to another episode of the most haunted city on earth. My name is Madison Timmons.
I'm Chris Susi.
And today we have a very special guest with us. We have Kyl Cobb, who is a demonologist, which y'all know how we feel about demons on this show. We love it. So we're very excited to talk to Kyl today. So Kyl, how are you doing?
Doing awesome today. How about y'all?
Doing very well.
Doing great.
So we'll let Kyl introduce himself in just one second, but I do want to give a few announcements before we get into it. First off, as y'all know, we have been trying to do our part to bring support to Western North Carolina.
Big way. We have a lot of
been affected in
properties.
It definitely affected JT and I in a big way. We have a lot of family and properties as well. So loved ones who all live in that area who have been affected, and friends as well. So we try to do our part to bring any kind of attention, if you will, to any sort of relief efforts that we can. And there is currently one that we want to tell y'all about. This particular fundraiser is happening here in Savannah, well, particularly on Tybee, and it's going to be benefiting the River Arts District Foundation. So a little breakdown on this particular event. The event is called Feel Good Fundraiser, and it will take place Sunday, November 17th from 12 p.m. to 4 p.m., and it will be at the Hotel Tybee Grandview Event Center on the upper level of the venue, and it will feature a Qigong yoga, 5 rhythms dance class, and sound bath. So there's going to be a lot of events going on. So there will be at 12:15 a Qigong class. There will be at 1:15 a gentle hatha yoga, 2:15 a 5 rhythms / conscious dance, 3:15 an immersive sound journey, which sounds amazing. So during the classes, vendors in the wellness and creative community will set up booths downstairs to display their business and products or offer mini sessions. So if that is something that sounds interesting to you and you want to support a really great cause, we will link the tickets down below. Also, we do want to say we do have a spin-off series that we are currently doing. It's JT and I, because we are true crime fanatics. We are currently doing a separate little podcast called From One to Wicked. It is basically set up the same way that we do our From One to Wicked segment here on this show. But instead, we take the stories of these true crime events and we rank them on a scale from 1 to wicked in 5 different categories. It's a lot of fun. It's very interactive. The Parajunkies actually live stream with us and give us their ranking by the end of it. So it is so much fun. We've covered some really gnarly stuff. And I know so some of y'all out there are very big true crime nuts as well. So if that's your jam, definitely check us out. It's called From One to Wicked. But yes, anywho, now let's get into the scary stuff. So the
wicked stuff.
The wicked stuff. So Kyl, again, thank you for joining us. So let me hand it over to you so that you can kind of introduce yourself a little bit, how you got into this particular practice and whatnot.
Okay. Well, my name is Kyl Cobb. I've been doing this kind of inadvertently since age 13. It was an accident. I had a college professor who gave up his university position to come take care of his dying parents. And when he did that, he started teaching middle school gifted program I live south of Atlanta in Griffin, Georgia, or near Griffin, Georgia. And so he decided he would take his gifted students and he would administer to them his college curriculum, which was ancient Greek religion, ancient Greek culture, and it was transformational in a bad way. It was way over my head. I was overwhelmed. But this amazing man went through, and for the next 5 years, every time we graduated, he graduated with us. He would move up. So he became our mentor through the entire process. And so age 13, we're reading the Iliad and the Odyssey. We are studying ancient Greek religion. We are studying cultures of the way the Greeks influenced culture. And so inadvertently, that was preparing me for this idea of alternate religions. I grew up Southern Baptist, and so for me, that was a radical change. Shortly, I guess kind of parallel to that, I started taking Latin, and it was, for me, kind of transformational because I found that while I have no spoken aptitude for languages, I have a reading aptitude. And so after the first year Latin, I was actually able to read the Ovid in Latin, which my Latin instructor couldn't do.
Wow.
And so that just kind of was something that became a talent. I kind of set that on the shelf as I was going through high school, and religion was kind of the farthest thing from my mind. Paranormal was nowhere out there. My father experienced cancer and died when I was 17. I graduated early from high school, and so this was all as I was preparing to go away to originally an appointment to Annapolis. I ended up going to Georgia Tech instead, but it sent me on this religious quest. I couldn't understand how everything I had been taught from a religious perspective reconciled with the death of a parent. And so as a result, I literally spent the rest of my life studying ancient religions and modern religions. At this point, I've studied 24 different religions, and I've traveled to 60 countries around the world as part of it. For me, the idea of the idea of demons seemed to be a very faraway concept. But one of the things that I did as part of my studies of religion is I started with Christianity, which I was familiar with, and went backwards. I said, well, what makes the Baptist church different? What makes the Methodist? And then I kept going back and I said, okay, here's the Protestant break. What makes the Protestants different from the Catholics? And then I went backwards from there. And I said, okay, here's what makes the Catholics, but what makes them different from the Orthodox Christians? And I kept going backwards. And sometimes I would go out to little spurs like, okay, how are grimoires interacting with the Catholic religion? How are all of these interacting? And suddenly my worldview began to change because I began to see how all of these things played together. And when I got to the end of Christianity, I said, well, let me go further. And so the next step was, let me go back into the Jewish faith. And as you start unraveling that, you learn that everything you were taught's a lie and that it's evolved over time and transformed. And things as simple as if you are a King James Bible thumper, you read that version and you realize that there are euphemisms. The tribes of Israel aren't. They're different religion groups of with the people that became Israeli. And then you start learning that, while the popular prevailing Israel group are worshipers of a solitary God, Yahweh, who actually is a volcano god from Canaan, but that's a whole other digression. You start to learn that most of the other groups are polytheistic. And you start then looking at the languages and you discover, hey, wait a minute. The reason there's two versions of a woman getting created in Genesis is because those are two different texts. One is from the idea of many gods and one's from a single God. And so they're different stories, and you start beginning to see how things change and evolve. And so as I went back as far back in the Hebrew concept as I thought I could go at that time, I said, well, the world isn't this, this clear-cut thing. So I started looking around and I said, well, who was competing against, for instance, the Yahweh cult? And, it turned out like Baal Hadad. Hadad was the most popular god in the Mediterranean at that time. That's why he is in the Bible, Beelzebub. And you start seeing this whole big mosaic And you learn that all of the niceties from ancient religions that we've been given are wrong. When we think about the Greek gods, we think about Zeus and Athena and the beautiful gods in the marble statues. They don't tell you that they sacrificed people to them. They don't tell you the dirty side. They don't tell you that these religions kind of all are the result of other religions transforming into the modern interpretations. And so I kept peeling back the layers. And as I did it, I got to the point where it kind of began to gel. You start to see the patterns. And I finally have gone as far back as we can from the written side anyway. I'm now working on ancient Sumerian and Akkadian, which is as far back as we can go. Epic of Gilgamesh, for instance, is the most complete book. And we see a lot of parallel stories in that as Christians. The best example that you've all probably heard of is the flood example. And, one of the things you start to realize is, well, if you actually read the Hebrew version of the Bible, or even read the modern Christian versions of the Old Testament carefully, it actually tells you that Abraham, the creator of the triembryonic faiths, Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, comes from Ur in Sumer. His people were Semitic, and Sumer was captured by a Semitic-speaking people who then transformed it into the Akkadian Empire, one of the first empires in the world. And so the Abrahamic faith gets its origins, its stories, Eden, the fall of man, all of that. It gets it right out of the Sumerian legends. And so that's kind of where my whole interest has been focused lately. I'm currently in the master's program at the University of Wales in ancient religion, focusing on ancient Sumerian, but now I'm getting sidetracked on it. I got interested in Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe, the discoveries in Turkey that date back to the end of the Lesser Dryas period. And one of the amazing things, some of the scholars that I've been reading on there's something called small signs, which everybody ignored. They thought it was just artwork. And I know I'm rambling, I'm sorry, but you get me on a tangent. But, they've discovered that while these sites are famous for the big carvings, three-dimensional carvings there, the real important part is there are lots of little small symbols, small signs all around the temples and the buildings. And for literally hundreds of years before they had discovered the tepes, they had found little scraps, little plaques, like with little artwork, doodles. They thought they were just like, here's a drawing of a snake and a snake with hands and things like that. And they just thought they were art or some kind of unknown symbolics. But now that we've got the small signs on these amazing temples, it looks like it may be a language. And actually, in Karahan Tepe and Göbekli Tepe, we found a character that's like the letter H, the capital letter H, and it's two people holding hands. And some of the scholars are now saying maybe that links actually 5,000 years later to the goddess Inanna, the first of the female kind of Aphrodite prototypes, and the first recorded marriage we have in history at this point. So it's all for me kind of coming together. And so from a kind of religious perspective, when I think about demons, I'm trying to look at the whole scope of humanity and how we've reinterpreted one culture's gods to another culture's demons, and then roll that forward as to how it applies to quote unquote modern possessions and modern incidents that defy human understanding and human logic. And so that's kind of my overall approach. So that's why I'm a little different than like your television demonologist. I don't get possessed every week, but it's one of those things that I try to look at it not just from a Christian perspective, not just from an Eastern perspective. I try to look at it from a holistic perspective. What are we really encountering, and how does it begin to mesh with a bigger side of the equation as well? Because I also try to incorporate some science in it. I try to look at, okay, what is the physics behind some of this? And that gets you off in all sorts of rabbit holes. But, it slowly, I think we're getting to the point where we can begin to reinterpret our entire history. The Göbekli Tepe discovery, and Karahan Tepe is near and dear to my heart. It can change everything. I think we're going to, and again, I know I'm kind of getting off the subject a little bit, but I think maybe not in my lifetime, but maybe within the next 50 to 100 years, we're going to be able to say concretely, mankind had this amazing history before the end of the Younger Dryas that's been wiped off, whether it was by comet strikes or whether it was by solar flares. I think we're getting to the point where our gods and demons and historical stuff, we're going to turn around and say, hey, this is really just part of us reinterpreting our own past that's been wiped away. Anyway, I'll get off my sermon.
No, that's great. Thank you so much for sharing all that, because it's fascinating to know where the source of your knowledge comes from this academic background. Now, you have been called in on cases, correct?
A lot.
To sort of come to a general consensus of the variety of things that might be going on.
So before COVID shut down the world, I was taking about 200 calls a month and screening them. Wow. Of those 200 calls a month, you may get one legitimate every couple months, or that has founding anyway. The vast majority of what people think are paranormal cases are more psychological. People have seen one too many episodes of a certain adventure show. They have seen one too many television episodes. I used to, just based on the phone calls and the text I received, I could tell you who was the guest star that week on Supernatural. And a lot of people just, they need something to make them different or special, and their minds trigger and say, okay, this is what's happening to me, because they also don't want to face sometimes the real situation. Every once in a while, though, you'll get stories when you're discussing it with people that pass the test. So when I'm talking with each one of these, even today, someone will call up at random and I'll spend 2 or 3 hours with them on the phone. And what they don't realize is as we're talking, I'm actually beginning to kind of run them through a series of preset questions to determine whether there's basis of it or not. And sometimes I'll even throw out false leads to see where they go with it. That tell me immediately, hey, this isn't really a case. Mm-hmm. But we go through that process, and, out of, I mentioned you may get one every couple months back when I was doing a lot of them. So out of roughly 400 contacts, you get that one case. And that one case says, okay, there's things that are not psychological potentially or medical. But I'm not a doctor. I'm not a psychiatrist. So one of the things you always do is say, hey, you need to get this evaluation as part of it. From that point, you go and you will usually try to examine it from a forensic side. Okay, what's going on? Tell me what the symptoms are. Give me the whole breakdown of the case of what's going on. And from that, you'll find a handful of them that are paranormal. It's some apparition, maybe some malevolent spirit, something going on. And you'll say, okay, let's address it that way. And then you start looking for the telltale signs of what kinds of things stand out as something more exceptional than just a simple haunting.
So we kind of missed out on the conversation point of what makes a case outstanding. Like, what is it? What is the leap between what makes it a typical paranormal case in which any number of variables can be applied versus something a little more serious?
Well, I guess the first and foremost thing is most of what you see on television and the movies is not reality. In my humble opinion, real demonics are a bit like a mosquito. They're feeders. They feed on energy. And historically, depending on the translations, whether you're talking about something from Tibet or India or early periods, they're referred to as carnivores rather, in that they feed off people, but it's not a physical feeding necessarily. And so I believe that most of them are kind of like energy suckers. They feed off life force. And to that extent, unlike the movies, unlike television, there's not the dramatic stuff. They don't call attention to themselves, right? They aren't there to corrupt souls. They don't seem to care about souls. They're just feeders, just like you and me, very, very long-lived feeders. And so part of what it's been my experience anyway, they primarily are feeding on the old, the mentally ill, the infirm, people who already are in a degenerative state, and they just make them weaker. And they're not feeding just on one person, they're feeding on lots. When you look at a typical exorcism from a Christian Western perspective, there is, and I'll kind of divert in a minute and go back and explain what I'm about to say, but a real exorcism from a Christian perspective, if you're using, the rite of exorcism, this is 1614, or, the modern rites of exorcism, they're just slapping at it. They're just commanding it and say, hey, go away, leave them alone. Because the Christian perspective is that demonic entities are intangible, immortal, and invulnerable. So there's nothing you can do to hurt a demon from a Christian perspective. Okay? Mm-hmm. From an Eastern perspective, they have a different view. They think of them as being possibly invisible, able to at least change perception, but they are physically killable with a weapon. And what that means is that in the East, you have different tools. Now, this kind of roundabout way, though, to explain it, as soon as someone says, oh, it's making my husband angry, oh, it's making my wife act crazy, everybody's spouses are angry and crazy. But, you get to the point where they've seen all of these negative things. It's causing him to do this and that and this. That's not how the demonic MOs usually work. And that's what people don't understand. They're looking for this negative force. And the reason they're doing that is because we literally use the term demonization. And it goes back to, unfortunately, the way Christianity in the early days interpreted demonics. So and if you'll give me a moment for a digression real quick.
Go ahead. We're listening.
Lesson. So the Old Testament, that is as we refer to it today, comes from a lot of different Jewish sources that eventually were composited and moved forward. The first version of the Christianized Old Testament were parts of it that were called, as part of what's called the Septuagint. They were translated from the Hebrew into the Greek, sometimes directly from the Hebrew, sometimes from the Syriac, but into the Greek. The Greek, about 200 years later, was transferred into what we call the Vulgate, the Latin Bible. What happens is that the Greeks had a concept when they talked about divinities or the whole magical universe. The upper level, when a god or deity, so we'll say Zeus just as an example, when Zeus was on Olympus, or Apollo on Olympus, or Athena, or any of the gods were at their divine realm, their divine universe, it was called the Theos. And that was the generic term, theology. That's where the root comes from. It meant divinity in the divine realm. When Zeus comes down to earth, the term you would use is a daemon, a divinity on earth. All right. And so to explain the difference, in their divine realm, eternal, immortal, intangible, all of that to the humans. On Earth, Zeus can become a swan and impregnate someone. It can be a beam of light that impregnate. So they become physical.
He had an MO.
Right.
There's a scene in the Iliad. I can't remember what it was, Athena or Aphrodite. I think it was Aphrodite. She's on Earth as part of the Trojan War, and she gets stabbed and injured. That's the first time she's ever been hurt. And people all over the world hear her screaming in pain. So the idea is a divine entity on Earth is vulnerable. They're physical. So that's a daemon. That also, by the way, when we talk about the oracles at Delphi and the prophets, it's supposedly they're hearing the voice from an invisible daemon whispering to them. Okay? There's a third level called a demonium. A demonium is like, we would think of it almost like as a guardian angel today. It's a whispered inspiration, a muse. Plato and Sophocles both mention it in some of their writings. I think it was Plato who talks about he's coming back from one of his teachings, and a demonium whispers in his ear and says, "Don't go that way." And it turns out there's someone waiting to kill him. And so what happens then, and I know that was a quick diversion there, but what happens is when we go from the Septuagint over to the Vulgate, to the Latin, the monks 200 years later knew the words mostly, but they didn't know the context of how the Greeks actually treated the different levels. So what happens is for Theos, okay, God in heaven and angels in heaven, okay, we can buy on that one. So that's the Theos. Angels on earth, the fallen angels, or the Watchers, or anything like that, becomes a daemon. But then they didn't know what the difference was between a daemon and demonium, so they combined them. So what that meant is suddenly the fallen angels on earth became intangible, immortal, and unharmable. That's why today Christians believe that you can't kill a demon. You can only ask it to leave nicely. And that gets reinforced for the next 1,700 years.
Wasn't it generally accepted, though, in the Greek mythology that if you killed one of the Theos in their daemon form, they would just materialize back on Olympus?
That was the hope.
I mean, that was the general idea, because I want to say that I've encountered at least a couple of stories of hunting the god, and then you just get a respite. You know, you just get, it's like they're going to go back to Olympus, and if there's some requisite time to recharge or whatever, and then they'll come storming back down the mountain over time. I think that's the immortal concept. Yeah. So it was. I'm guessing this was late in the reckoning of what a god can do and can't do.
Well, and we also get flavors. So you have to realize that from the Greek perspective, Achilles was a demigod. He was a divinity on earth, half god. Hercules, right? All of the famous monsters and stuff like that. So you do, to your point, there is a power level,
right?
That comes from Zeus, which I just there's a series on Netflix right now called Chaos.
Chaos, right? We just started it, yeah.
So today, from a Western perspective, though, what we think demons are is something different than we thought of 1,800 years ago. And part of what my research has been working on is it's literally the Alexandrian line. So where Alexander conquered all the way into India, those Greek concepts that were mixed with the Christianity that eventually become corrupted, leave the demons in this kind of immortal form. But east of that line, they still have physicality.
Right. In China, they have like demon killing swords, like the 9 demon sword, and that's a furba.
Well,
right. Oh yeah, the demon killing sword. Yep. Exactly.
Yeah. This is the Chinese one.
They some of them are made of willow wood and
peachtree wood.
Peachtree wood. That's it.
And it has to do with a legend where one of the gods is basically at his low point. A peach tree
right.
helps him, and so as a result, this becomes the blessed weapon. But yeah, to your point, this is a furba. It's also called a kailavajja or a kailafurba.
Right.
And this is used to kill gods, demons, and originally they were made of wood. So about 1,000 years ago, they were wood, and you would crucify someone to the ground, literally crucify them. It's a 3-pointed blade. I know you probably can't tell that, but it's a 3-pointed blade, which means when you get stuck by it, you will never ever
bleed
naturally
forever.
heal.
Right.
And so whoever was crucified with it, if they survived just that, they would be left permanently with stigmata. And the idea was you would nail them to the ground, and that would trap the demon in the ground. It's made of 3 segments, in addition to being 3 blades. And the idea is you are killing the god or demon in the 3 realms of reality. And there's different interpretations of what the 3 realms are. It could be the past, present, and future. You're erasing them from all time. It could be the earth, the sky, and the underworld. And it even has, if you can see here, it's the 3 faces of Ajakaila.
Of Ajakaila, yeah.
So here's the generic one. I've got a collection. This one's about 200 years old. I also have another special one. This is one used to kill what's called a death demon.
Ooh.
So when someone dies, they believe that it attracts these demons to the village. And if the priests aren't brought in to do certain ceremonies, that it will begin to pick off and kill members of the village. If you looked at it from a different perspective, maybe a little more sciencey, maybe they brought in a disease to the village, and if not properly administered, it will wipe the village out.
Well, there are stories like all around the world about the death-coming demons, because it's obvious that it's about contagion of some type, of having a body out and whatever's coming out. Because I want to say there are Native Americans who believe in like the sickness that comes after someone dies. It's like someone dies and then, oh no, I'm getting sick, you're getting sick. And they're like, oh, it's the ill will of the spirit that's getting us. Which I find, endlessly fascinating.
Well, and I think we're getting to the point where more and more we're starting to see that the belief systems that are part of the early North and South American cultures actually can be traced to the Asian cultures, and maybe even originate kind of still in the same place.
Well, there's an incredible theory of the land bridge, coming from Asia and populating into North America.
But it's more than that now.
Oh,
so
is
it? They've discovered that there's something called a bottle gourd that's found in Indonesia, and it only can be grown as a domesticated element. It dates back about 10,000 years in Indonesia. They discovered them in South America that appears to date back about 9,000 years. That was been after the Lesser Dryas and after the bridge. And so that proves that there was
some kind of commerce or something.
Yeah. And so what we're, I think, beginning to see anyway, people smarter than I am are beginning to write a lot of papers saying that the world isn't really what we thought. That there are people that could do this kind of ocean transit, and we're more amazing than we like to think we are.
Absolutely. I had a question for you, Kyle. In the terms of, so once you have determined that your client is dealing with some kind of demonic presence, what is, if you want to give an example of a certain case that you dealt with, what's kind of the practice of handling these situations in your particular beliefs state, if you will?
Well, a lot of it depends on what's really going on. First of all, one of the things I didn't kind of get into is I do take some referrals. So occasionally it will be a member of the clergy or a shaman or someone that's a different kind of practitioner that's reaching out saying, hey, I'm in over my head. I don't know what to do. Sometimes it'll be a paranormal team scared off. So the first thing I get into is try to assess where is the client, the real core client, where are they coming from? Because part of it really still is a tug of war. And when we're talking about the way demons work, or I use the term daemon actually more than I use the term demons these days. But what it does have the ability to do, I mentioned from a historical perspective, particularly in the East, we believe that they can control perception. And so to that extent, I'll talk about a particular case that I was on and then to illustrate it. So I had a case that actually has ties to Savannah. Some individuals had gone to Savannah, they had gone to Bonaventure, and they had stolen some stones off one of the Jewish.
Don't do that. Looking at that camera, don't do that.
Don't do that.
So they brought them back to Atlanta at that point, and I don't think that brought the entity with them, but it got something's attention. One of the young ladies already that was involved in this duo had experienced night terrors and was beginning to have things happen in her world. So they reached out to me. They had heard about some of the stuff I did, and so I interviewed them, and there seemed to be something really going on. And I'm not going to give too many specifics because I keep client confidentiality, but I went and investigated. And always with the idea initially that it probably isn't anything demonic, but I wanted the baseline. The particular place that they lived was a converted townhouse that had been at one point an old people's home. And then before that, it had been, I think, Section 8 housing is what the research showed. There had been at least one person, a little girl, killed in front of the house. And so on the surface, it initially seemed to be just possibly a typical haunting. But then things started going a little sideways. Almost immediately, one of the profiles of this particular townhouse, it was where the electric trunk comes into the building. And so it was just bathed in EMF. So that'll screw with anybody's mind to begin with, which could also account for some of the night terrors and some of the things going on. But then as the investigation was going on, suddenly started getting like physical manifestations of objects moving and things that were much higher level than you would expect from a regular haunting. And I'll admit, on this particular case, I wasn't thinking I was looking for something demonic, but it seemed to be accelerating to that point. It really astounded me when, as I was trying to go back and forth to communicate, I asked the entity to come into the other bedroom. So there were a couple bedrooms. A little backstory from the client's perspective. After they'd gotten back from Savannah, one of the girls who had actually removed the stones had gone into her bedroom, locked the door, and gone to bed. She woke up the next morning and her room was rearranged. So I asked the entity to come with me into that room because we were in previously the girl that had been, when the activity was ramping up, in the girl that had the night terrors. But I asked it to come into the room that had been rearranged. We go into that room and the bed literally indents. And so start having a conversation. I then make probably a stupid amateurish mistake. I say, well, can you come downstairs with us? And downstairs they had these horrible 1990s ficus tree things. And I said, if you're here, do something to let me know. And it started shaking the ficus trees. You wouldn't see an apparition literally agitating. They had a kind of wind chime, and there's a breakfast nook thing that looks from it was popular in the 90s, where you had your little isolated dining area that looked out onto the living room. Mm-hmm. They had a wind chime there that was made of seashells, and it would take it and spin it up and let it go. Oof. So amazing physical activity, an alarming level of amazing physical activity. So things, from my perspective, began to progress pretty quickly. At that point, it was clear that we were facing something, and something very powerful, and something that was definitely not apparition level. So I began to make arrangements with the young ladies that we were going to do some stuff to take care of it. And this isn't something that you just pull the trigger and do instantly. Exorcisms in and of themselves may or may not work. That's where some of the other tools that I mentioned I will bring into a case if needed. About a 48-hour period lapsed before I was going to be ready to go forward, because I also wanted to reach out to some other resources just so I wasn't going in blind. And during that time, things like one of the girls went to the bathroom downstairs and it held her in the bathroom for half an hour. She was the only one in the house. Mm. It literally wouldn't let her out of her own bathroom. It held the door, and then it just opened the door and let her out. So things like that, it was showing acceleration. After that point, she called me to come over, so I came over quickly, and I said, well, at this point, we're going to need to take some more severe action to try to get rid of this thing. But here are some of the ramifications that I kind of went through the scenarios. Let her decide what she wanted to do, because ultimately it's her house, her life, and her roommate's life that are at play. So I will say this case goes badly. This is not a case that goes down in the Kyl book as a win.
Oh, no.
As things accelerate, one of the things that I'm beginning to think is that it may not be in any way, shape, even bound to her. It may be there simply as their target of convenience. And part of it is it becomes really hard to detect because there's so much EMF interference. None of the normal toys and most of them are trash anyway. If they say, if it's got the word ghost on it on Amazon, it's trash. But some of them can be helpful, like things like laser grids, because in theory, physics laws don't change too much. But so you try to, there's some tools you can use, but a lot of things you couldn't use. I try to use sometimes the bionic ears that amplify sound, so you can sometimes hear a little bit more than the hearing range one way or the other. But almost all the tools that you would try to use to just do any kind of paranormally detection were useless. Even audio recorders, when you actually went to try to use them, there was so much EMF, you just got basically hiss constantly. So I told the girls, I'm going to try to take care of this, but it's something you may want to consider if it's here at this location and it's not related to you. You may want to consider moving. I was honest. And they were already, halfway out the door. They're like, hey, we've already been giving that serious consideration. But my amateur move in doing that was to presume I was telling them that in a position that would not be overheard.
Oh, no.
that night I was attacked. And to this day, it still gives me literally chills. It was August in Atlanta. This was one of the summers that in August, it was really hot. It was like in the hundreds hot. And we've all, anybody in Georgia knows what those temperatures are like. And so, in part of the attack, it told me I was cold. And so for the next 6 weeks, I was freezing. I was wearing winter coats, blankets. I saw medical doctors. I saw psychiatrists. They're like, there's nothing physically wrong with you other than you're burning yourself up. So this is where I lose. So the real power of a demonic is when you actually translate it into the Greek word, ekbalo means that it's not controlling you, it's actually suggesting. It's planting thoughts in your mind as though they're yours. And that's what it had done. It took me 6 weeks to get past that. And I will tell you, this case went really, really bad afterwards. I'll give you another quick example, not to divert from the uncomfort of complete failure. Another example of this, I was doing an investigation where there was a demonic. Again, we weren't going into it believing it was a demonic. Again, it's supposed to be just an agitated spirit. It's part of the rules when you're doing investigation in the field. You never go anywhere by yourself. Usually I assign a team of 2 wanderers and then 1 person remotely monitoring with extra cameras and, just as backup, 911. In this particular case, it was myself. 2 individuals were going and doing the legwork. We had another person doing the central monitoring. We had just taken a hiatus before working the next floor of this particular building. We go up. So as part of taking the hiatus, they had gone to the bathroom, flashlights were all working, all of that stuff. The only reason, by the way, we do any kind of work in the dark, which I generally don't like to do, is if I'm trying to shoot with either infrared or ultraviolet. I'll sometimes do work in the dark. This particular case, we had set up cameras all over, but we were doing both light and dark. We go up into this particular room that we'd never been in the house before. And 2 of the investigators immediately say, it was actually me and there were three with me. So it's a total of 4 of us. One of them immediately says, I've got to go pee, and turns around and runs downstairs. Abandons us. 2 of them almost simultaneously after that say, my flashlight's not working. I can't see. It's dark. I got to go down and get my flashlight changed. And they left me. And this figure, darker than dark, comes running past me and literally, I'm a big guy, a fat guy, picks me and shoves me to the side like I was a child and just keeps going. So again, suggestion. It's playing with your perceptions. It's telling people that they can't see it. They can't hear it. And so that's the kind of thing when you're facing it, you have to deal with. Sometimes you'll hear it and you'll know it's talking to you in your own thoughts and you can resist it. When we're doing an exorcism, that's really what we're doing is we're reinforcing from a Western perspective, you're really reinforcing the resolve of the client to give them the mental power to resist whatever it is that's happening. And, whether it's through prayer, the belief of that, whether it's placebo effect, whether it's just the idea of, I guess, reinforcing your own internal willpower. Or to use my analogy from earlier, you swat at it. It's easier to leave them alone and go bother someone else. And so that's really, from my perspective, what a Christian Western exorcism is. The other hand, sometimes things don't stop. And that's when I bring in some of these, and sometimes just bringing one of these in alone gets it to go away. And I got another one that I should have probably brought on camera, but I didn't because I got one that was auctioned at Sotheby's in the 70s. It's one of the top 100 most cursed items on the planet.
Wow.
Oh, okay.
And I didn't know that when I got it.
Didn't come with a disclaimer?
Huh?
Yeah.
No, that's part of the whole deal. For this item, the history had gone back, and I didn't get the history until after I'd gotten it.
And was it a Furba?
It's a Furba, approximately 250 years old, roughly.
Wow.
It's a little different than those, but basically the same looking.
And where is it?
Huh?
Where is that one?
I've got it in my case.
Can we see the cursed item?
You want to put it on? Pause for a minute and we're gonna
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
We're more than happy to. Wait, before you grab it though. Wait. I was going to say, is this? I believe we spoke about this at the last Paracon. Is this the cursed Furba that wreaked a little havoc in your life?
Yep.
Okay.
Amazing.
Excellent.
Well, not for you, but amazing to hear.
If you're okay handling it, we'd love to see it.
I've paid the blood price. So
Right.
Yeah. Hang on.
JT's like, I need to see the cursed item immediately.
It's amazing.
I mean, I'm very excited. It's gonna be great.
I love his background. He just looks like he's in a gothic dungeon.
It's
library.
This is my macabre academy.
A cabinet of curiosities, if you will.
Yeah, well, he keeps turning around and pulling up ancient demon fighting tools. I'm like, yes, I agree.
I love that.
I fully concur.
Don't you have a demon
I do.
sword?
I have a demon sword. I have 2 demon swords.
Okay, so this will be the first time this has been seen on any kind of media.
Wow.
Oh boy.
Here we go.
Probably ever. I only take it out of its safety if I'm dealing with something really, 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 really bad.
It's a bully.
Oh God.
So this is it.
Oof.
Wow.
Oh wow.
So the difference between this one and this one, see, not only is size, but see how this has the globes?
Right.
So the legend is, first of all, no one can offer it to you. Okay? The curse passes when someone asks to have it.
Oh.
And if they ask to have it and touch it, they get the curse.
Oh boy.
So the background on how it came into my possession, I had a friend who had just experienced a suicide of his brother, and he was really just torn up with grief. And he thought that his brother was haunting him. I knew it wasn't. I knew it was totally grief. But he's like, please, I'll do anything. I just need you to kind of get his spirit to leave me. And I said, well, maybe there's something I can do. So I was going to put it on a dog and pony, just the kind of, talking through, okay, we're going to ask your brother if he's here to leave. We're going to try to intervene.
The placebo effect you were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so as part of that, I was like, well, I was living in Atlanta at that point. I was like, hey, I could go and maybe get some new agey stuff and, make him feel like there was some glitz, some stuff going on. And so I decided I needed a Furba. I'd never seen, I'd only seen the little cheap ones that they had in the little new age shops. But amazingly, no one in Atlanta had a Furba. because there were only 3 or 4 New Age shops back then. But I was driving around Atlanta's perimeter, 285, where, it's a 55 zone that they drive 700 miles an hour.
Yeah.
And I was driving around that, and over in Cobb County, where the Brave Stadium is now, the Galleria had a sign up that they were having a knife show. I wasn't ever someone who would go into a knife show, but something said I had to go to this knife show. I went into the knife show, went immediately back to the back of the place, bypassed every single other dealer, went up to this dealer and said, "Do you by any chance have?" And I defer. He basically fell out of his seat trying to give it to me.
He's like, "Please."
Yeah. You asked for it. You asked for it.
For practically nothing.
Wow.
And I can tell you, something like this, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars. Something like this, thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. He practically gave it to me.
Wow.
He's like, "Give me your information and I'll send you everything I've got on it." And that's when things went suddenly south. So I leave, bourbon in hand, on 285. And again, 285, back then it was 55. I think
it's
now,
super dangerous.
Yeah, now it's like, cars flying.
Huh.
Literally, as I'm driving, and I have a brand new car. It was a Honda Element, working fine. It literally, I'm going probably 65 or whatever. It literally is like I hit something.
What?
Dead stop. Cars are zooming around. It's a miracle I didn't get killed then and there.
Wow.
Call, they come and they tow it, take it to the dealership. They plug it in. There's no faults in the computer. There's no record of anything happening to it. They crank it up. It works fine. I take it home. The next morning, all 4 tires have exploded.
What?
Have it towed, fixed. Back then, I ate out all the time. I was this, I was an Atlanta upper guy. You ate out you ate out every time. You didn't. I don't have a home life, so I eat out every meal, every single meal for weeks. The waiter would spill the drink on me, spill a pitcher on me, drop the plate of food on me, drop a tray of food on me, every single meal.
Dang.
My friends who were accompanying me would watch this, and even my best friend was like, "I'm not going to hang out with you right now." It was that bad. I had 2 close relatives die within a 2-day period that had nothing wrong with them. Everything was just exploding left and right. And it just seemed like nothing I did worked. It just was chaos. I get the information, the guy had mailed it to me, and it explained basically the story I relayed. You have to ask for it. Once it's asked for and touched, you inherit the curse. And there were 95 acts of attrition, the blood price you had to pay to get the weapon. Wow. And if you survived, which apparently some of the previous owners did not, it becomes your weapon to wield. But that's the curse and the legend. Now, the weird thing of it is, so back then I wasn't doing some of the extreme stuff, but the first time I took this thing into a case that had a real demonic, it did something that scared the living daylights out of me. So again, you see the kind of the little globe here?
Mm-hmm.
It began to spark like a plasma ball.
Oh.
Wow.
And apparently the metallurgy, these come in 1, 3, or 7 kinds of metal. But basically they're super conductive electric. They're lightning rods, and it sucks the energy out of the air. And so the first time I took it around a demonic, it apparently was feeding off of it. I've never seen anything like that anywhere else in my life.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Wow. Yeah, it's super interesting.
This is the big gun. I only carry it into cases that, and I'm hard to terrify. I only carry it into cases that I am really concerned about for myself or the client. So, but anyway, that's the long version.
Wow.
I will side story. I had a friend of mine who I won't go into any details about that particular individual, but I had this weapon out because before COVID, and still sometimes now, people send me their haunted and cursed items from all over to eliminate. And so part of it is when I get those, I triage them because most of it's just crap and some of it's not, but just in case I keep this out. And this person was there and I told them, no matter what, you do not come in contact with this. Absolutely do not come in contact. And that person was an idiot.
Oh, no.
And touched it. Within the next 2 weeks, that person's life totally dismantled itself. So, and I'm not going to go into any more detail on that one.
Sure.
But, yeah.
Wow. No, that's fantastic. And you actually have quite an impressive collection of artifacts from all around the world, right? About
somewhere over 5,000 at this point. The oldest pieces I've got like a Neanderthal tattoo device or maybe a scalpel.
Wow.
That's so cool.
I've got some Sumerian cuneiform tablets. I've got Greek. I've got a lot of Egyptian stuff. I've been lucky enough to spend a good bit of time in Egypt. I've got Mayan stuff, Incan stuff. I was really lucky. So the Maya still exists, right?
Yeah.
I used to travel back when it was a lot safer. I would go to Mexico 3 or 4 times a year, and I've hit every ruin within 300 miles of Mexico City. And I befriended some of the Maya, and they actually asked me one year to come to their sun death ritual.
Wow.
And they do volunteer. They do it at solstice, right? And they invite a demon to possess one of the members of their tribe. It's the most amazing thing ever. As I understand it, it's a volunteer. It's usually a boy or girl, 17-ish, somewhere in that neighborhood, that volunteers. And the night before, they begin to construct a 3-circled altar made of flowers and fruits that basically replicate an old Maya. They replicate wall paintings in the concentric circles on the outer level. And then there are 2 circles of occupation with the idea that they will open it up, take the victim in the center, and invite the demon into the person's body. This may seem odd, but they do this in Indonesia and in the Philippines because they believe it pays off kind of a karmic debt. And more importantly, it persuades the demon in exchange for that brief period in the human host to not harm the village and to bring them good luck and good fortune in the coming year. So they have this kid who goes in there and he's dressed in a sacred costume, and the Jamin, which is a kind of shaman, invites the demon in, and this kid changes. Physically changes. Muscles ripple. He contorts. I still can't really even fully explain. He physically begins to transform. And this is done right as the sun's beginning to rise, the birth of the sun on the solstice. Mm-hmm. So December 21st back then. For the next 12 hours, because they're close enough to the equator, that's almost 12 hours. This person channeling this demon does acrobatics that the Olympics couldn't keep up with. flips, twirls, jumps, leaps, constantly. Other interactors as part of the ritual come in and out. They last about 10 or 15 minutes, and they're out because they're physically exhausted. This person, the possessed, never, ever, ever stops. No water, no food, nothing. For 12 hours.
Wow.
It is the most mind-blowing, amazing thing I have ever seen.
Wow.
So amazing.
And as the sun begins to set, one by one, all the other actors, participants are taken out of the ritual. And the Jamin goes and breaks the first outer seal. And the Jamin goes and breaks the second inner seal. And still, this kid is still swirling furiously. The Jamin comes in and performs the last one of the rituals. And part of it uses a kind of smoke, and part of it uses some magic and some words. And then this whirling dervish of energy collapses completely. The guy, in this case, it was a guy, he can't really talk. He can't stand. He literally is carried out. And as I'm talking to the friends there, they tell me that many years the person dies. He's paid the village's debt. And even if he doesn't or she doesn't die, it may be very many months before they will even be able to walk or talk again.
Wow. And
it's just the most amazing thing. Yeah. Sorry. I know I've got it all over the place. But,
no, this is fantastic. And
really
we are kind of coming to the end of our time. And we would love to offer you an invitation to come back at a later date, because I know you have much more to say about many other objects. But real quickly, could you give us a quick rundown of the books that you have available and where people might be able to find them?
Yeah. So that I'm not actually prepared for. So I have a textbook. So it's called Ghosts and Demons, The Lost Things. This is the second edition. About 10 years ago, I released the first edition, and it's a paranormal textbook. So it's designed to answer all the questions. When I got started with the paranormal, I didn't know how to answer. And so it's got science in it. It's got the history of the paranormal. It's actually got, I did case studies on some of the most famous possession cases, like The Truth Behind the Exorcist movie, the case of the Emily Rose movie, Unleashed Mickle. What was the truth behind that? So that's all in this book. I will say this book has one embarrassment. So when I released this book, I was the first author to publish the real identity of the boy behind The Exorcist.
Oh, Rolando.
Yeah. And I wasn't the first one to discover it. There was a clever man, Joe Nickel, who ferreted him out, but I was the first one to actually publish it in a book.
Wow.
And as a regret, though, it turns out I ruined this guy's life.
Yeah.
Didn't know it, and I didn't know he was alive at the time. But that's a real regret, and I try to apologize to him in this version of the book. But anyway, that's The Lost Things, and that's I wrote the second edition because it turns out universities have been teaching from this book around the world. And so I had a university reach out and say, hey, if you will do a second edition, we'll use that for the next 5 years for our curriculum. One other paranormal book, I can grab it. So this is the one that's on the demons, Ghosts and Demons, Forgotten Lore.
That is a great book.
With about a dozen biblical demons, and tells you the real history about them. And unlike a lot of other folks who write demon books, they'll, mention a reference. I actually reprint the reference when possible. I'll give you the old German. I'll give you the Hebrew. And I'll do the comparisons to try to actually show you the real source of it, because Fox Mulder taught me not to trust anyone. So that's my general philosophy.
I mean, the truth is out there. So
the last book, this falls into your true crime stuff. This is my new set. 4 years in the making, me tracking a con man around the world.
Ooh.
Wow. Tracked him from
So
1870 until his death in 1917. And there are days I can tell you literally what he had for lunch. But he marries them and robs them. So he goes from woman to woman, doing that, making millions. He's considered to be the first senator to be appointed from the territory of South Dakota before he runs off. He actually is run on a congressional campaign. He steals all the money. He is on 2 presidential campaigns. But what makes him really cool, he goes to New Zealand and founds a sex cult that has over 30,000 members, and it threatens to shut down the Christian churches in New Zealand.
Wow.
They built him a temple. And even after they find out he's a con man, for still the next 10 years, they let him basically run this thing.
What?
An amazing character. And so I've got an extensive history book on him, but then I have found this. All right, so this guy's a megalomaniac, right? But he has a photographic memory.
Amazing.
So he writes a book of philosophy for his cult, and I own one of the actual only 10 existing copies. So actually, as volume 2, I reproduce the book for people, so scholars will have it.
Amazing.
He took over a magazine in New York that there's only one existing copy still of all the issues, and I got them through some seriously begging. I got people to scan it for me, and I retranscribed the entire sections that he wrote of the magazine. And then I found that his sermons, he was such a megalomaniac, he delivered about 3 sermons a day sometimes, extemporaneously, right off the top of his head, 1.5-hour long sermons. And he had a photographic memory, so he could quote biblical stuff, he could quote books, he could quote all this from, just straight out. He paid a stenographer to transcribe them and printed them in a newspaper, and I found copies of them in a New Zealand newspaper lot. And so I reconstructed, they were really horrible copies, but I reconstructed 117 of his sermons.
Wow.
Goodness gracious. What's it called again?
The series is called The Love God.
The Love God.
And so The Love God Revealed is his book, and The Love God Speaks is all his sermons.
Wow.
That's dope,
Phenomenal.
Kyle.
Yes.
Anyway, so I know that's not paranormal, but
No.
My new baby. It took me,
Yes.
this particular one, I was writing a history of my hometown, Griffin, Georgia, and I found Griffin didn't have a newspaper digitized back in this early period. But a place down the road, Columbus, Georgia, got a grant at one point and had all of its newspapers digitized from 1830 until 1890. But there was no index. So I read every page of the Columbus newspaper, 5,500 pages, to find Griffin News. And I found a paragraph in there about this guy stealing money from a Griffin debutante after marrying her. She's actually married. This girl that he robbed in Griffin is actually married at Bonaventure.
Oh, there you go. Yet another Savannah inverts. Yeah, there you go.
It all comes back to Savannah, if you will.
So that's the kind of mania that got me to write this book, and so that's my latest. So
Fantastic.
They're all available on Amazon and some bookstores. I don't know.
Phenomenal.
Yeah, email me the link. I'll put them down below.
Okay, we'll do.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Kyle, for sharing your knowledge with us and your very scary objects. And we really appreciate you being on. And yes, definitely, if you are willing, we'd love to have you back for a part 2 so that we can further discuss. And
one more scary object?
Yes, absolutely.
If you watch Supernatural, you've heard of the idea of a crossroads demon.
Mm-hmm.
This is the altar buried to hold a crossroads demon.
Oh my God. Wow.
Dang.
That's a nightmare.
Yeah.
Amazing, though.
That.
That is phenomenal, though. Yes. But, yeah, I mean, honestly, we might even do it where we did a recent episode with some girls who were a part of a demonic situation. And so we did a part 2 where we had the Parajunkies come in with questions, and I feel like this will be an appropriate one as well.
Yes.
And maybe, I don't want to speak out of turn, but maybe we can plan a field trip to come see you and see some of these things in person.
Yeah.
And we can film on location.
I would allow that.
That would be awesome.
That would be very awesome. But yes, so thank y'all so much for listening to today's episode. We hope you enjoyed. If you have any ghost stories that you would like to send to us, we do a segment called Ghost Mail. So you can send us all of your spooky stories, demonic or non, to ghostmail@hauntedcitypodcast.com. And with that, my name is Madison Timmons.
I'm Chris Susi.
And stay spooky, y'all.